Picture yourself walking down this hill on the 17th of June 1944. World War II is still raging. In fact, the D-Day landings in Normandy started less than 2 weeks ago. It's pouring with rain and it's blowing a gale, but there's a huge crowd of people here. Despite everything I just said, the mood is quite positive, because today, 20% of Icelanders have made the trip to come here, to the political heart of the nation, to witness the official declaration of independence from Denmark. I'm standing here in a place called Thingvellir, which is arguably the cultural and political home or heart, birthplace of Iceland, sort of. Why do I say that? Well, this here is the site of the original Icelandic parliament established in 930. It's the oldest continuously running parliament definitely in Europe. I'm not sure about the world, probably not. The other noteworthy thing, this crevice is actually the meeting point of the European and American tectonic plates.
Melts, so it ends up being on a column like so, and a column is like at some point. So this one glacier and this one, they used it to be one.
When I came to Iceland, I had very high expectations. And I have to say, my expectations were met. But the thing is, the only thing I had expectations about was the natural beauty. Features like glaciers, geothermal activity, mineral baths, hiking, whale watching. I had no idea that the history and culture would be so fascinating. For me, learning about this was actually a highlight of the trip. So while I show you pictures of melting glaciers and my semi-naked body in a thermal spring, I'll weave in my favourite stories about Vikings and the history of Reykjavik. We just thought we'd stop the car and show you some representative landscape from the driving that we've been doing today. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Trainspotting, but there's a scene where they catch the train out into the middle of nowhere in Scotland and just get out and go for a walk. There's quite a few places in Iceland that really remind me of that kind of scenery. Tell us what we're doing now.
We're hiking to the hot river near the hot springs at Reykjavik.
Something like that. Yeah. 3 kilometers that way.
3K hike up this big hill.
Yeah.
Hello.
So we hiked for 3 kilometers straight uphill. Took us about 1.5 hours. You can do it really in 45 to 50 minutes. But this is the reward when you finally get here. This footage is from mid-May 2022. Given it's springtime and the ice is melting, all of the rivers and waterfalls are really flowing. You may recognize this waterfall from the TV series Vikings. I personally haven't seen it. Speaking of Vikings, let me tell you one story and then I'll move on. The most famous stories from Icelandic history are told in the form of sagas. and one of the most famous is about a guy named Earl Skallagrimsson, a 10th century poet, warrior, and farmer. From a young age, it was clear he was destined to be a great man. One day he was playing a ball game with the other children. An older kid, named Grim, aged 10 or 11, was embarrassing him. He was winning the game and pushing Earl around. So Earl, then aged 7, killed him with an axe. Years later, Earl, like a proper Viking, somehow became enemies with a Norwegian king named Erik Bloodaxe and his queen. He even killed the king's son, and their various attempts at vengeance failed. Eventually, Earl was captured and brought before the king, in England of all places, with the intention of having him executed. However, at the last minute, Earl composed a poem. Yes, he wrote a poem while he was in custody. Basically, the poem said lots of nice things about the king. Erik Bloodaxe was so impressed by the poem that he set Earl free and forgave him. People had really f***ed up priorities in the 10th century. These days in Iceland, basically nobody ever kills anyone. No one even gets stabbed. It's literally the safest country on earth. I'm standing here in front of the first vessel in the Icelandic Navy. Here in Iceland, they're proud of the fact that they have a $0 defense budget. They basically don't have an army, they don't have a navy. Well, they do have a coast guard, but that's just for checking economic fishing zones are enforced. And the reason for that is very simple. Iceland effectively outsources its defense and its security to the United States. There is a now dormant US military base here, but the deterrent effect is still very relevant. Iceland got its independence from Denmark in 1944. They did it with funding and help from the United States. In return, they agreed to have a permanent US military base here. And as a result, Icelanders can spend their tax dollars on other things, like having a very comprehensive social security system and 30 or 40% of people employed by the government to provide these services. Reykjavik and surrounds now houses 2/3 of its population, but for most of Iceland's history, pretty much everyone lived and worked on farms. Back in the year 1870, about 90% of Icelanders lived in communities of less than 50 people. In the late 9th century, one of the first permanent settlers to leave Norway for Iceland, this guy Ingólfur Arnarsson, decided to ask the god Thor, aka Chris Hemsworth, where he should build his new farm. On the way, he threw 2 planks of wood overboard and committed to settling wherever they washed ashore. Once in Iceland, he sent his slaves to find the holy wooden beams. Guess where they washed up? Reykjavik, literally Smoky Bay, or maybe Steamy Bay, depending on how you want to translate it. These days, the planks of wood are the symbol of the city. Amazingly, this is a complete coincidence and has actually nothing to do with Reykjavik's current status as the capital of Iceland. It was just a complete fluke. So the church you see over my shoulder here, when you first see it, you get the impression it's a really ancient structure, but actually it was only completed in 1986 and started, I think, about 40 years before that. Key architectural features of the church, apart from being at the top of the hill, are the concrete hexagons used to give the concrete concrete hexagons Concrete hexagons. Yeah, tell us about the concrete hexagons, Dad.
So they mimic the basalt, the natural formation of the basalt that you find in Iceland. When the lava flows and freezes, it forms in the shape of a hexagon, which is amazing. But it's a natural makeup of the molecules, apparently, of the basalt lava that they form that way. So the church is trying to mimic that in its design.
What he said. And you'll also see this motif of the hexagon repeated throughout the city. The bridge I'm walking across now is over a pond, or a lake, between the municipal council behind me and the monument to the unknown bureaucrat. This lake actually freezes over in the winter. You can walk straight out in the middle. Apparently people play football, go ice skating, whatever you do on a frozen lake. And you see those birds behind me. Apparently when it's frozen over, they still deliberately pump some hot water into the corner of the lake and create like a little lagoon where all of the birds who are still here in the winter just go and crowd around in the warm water. And that's the back of the Federal Parliament building straight over there, just near the municipal council. On the subject of barren landscapes, you'll notice there are hardly any trees. Okay, we are a long way north here and the climate is not exactly tree friendly. However, when humans first came here, Iceland was up to 40% forest. The explorers literally could not explore over land. They had to follow the rivers to get inland. The forest was just so thick. Of course, they cut down the trees to build houses, to burn it as firewood, and to make space for their livestock. These days, despite reforestation efforts, Iceland is less than 2% trees. And the chunks of ice in that lagoon eventually flow under a bridge over the river and out into the sea. So you'll already be well aware that climate change is a thing and the glaciers here are all melting, and on a serious note, if you do want to see them and walk on them, you should get to Iceland soonish. What you probably didn't know is Iceland is one of the only islands in the world not vulnerable to rising sea levels. In fact, Iceland gets further above sea level every year. That's because of the action of the tectonic plates in the middle of the island pushing against one another, effectively causing it to rise up out of the ocean. Thank you. Ready? Thank you. Thank you. One more. All right. I think my time's just about up. I could, of course, show you a lot more footage of gushing waterfalls, snow-capped mountains, and the earth spewing out rotten egg gas. I could also tell you fascinating stories about Iceland's history that I didn't have time to share, but instead I'm just going to leave you with a montage of footage that didn't quite fit in, but I still want you to see. In summary, I'd say that Iceland definitely lives up to the hype. I do recommend it. It was well worth the visit, and there's a non-zero chance I'll be back here one day. Thanks for watching.